You were was it the tour manager for Oasis?
It was my initial role with the band was as their head of security.
Right.
But in the period between my interviewing for that job and starting work, there were some challenges that the band faced, and so Marcus Russell, their manager, who I knew from Johnny Marr, and we were friends already, he shifted the brief. He said, I need you to coordinate security, but I also need you to road manage the band. So effectively, Margaret Mouzakitis kind of handled all the production elements of our shows, and I handled all the band movements, press, promotion, TV, radio, that kind of stuff, and then moonlighted as head of security.
Tell me about the first time you watched them live.
Well, I mean, the first time I saw them play, I was in New York City with a band that I'm fairly confident nobody watching this podcast will have heard of. They were called XCNN. Tim Briceno, who was formerly of the Sisters of Mercy, who perhaps some people have heard of, and All About Eve. Anyway, he had a band called XCNN. They were playing at the New Music Seminar in a venue called The Wetlands on the Lower West Side of Manhattan. And I was tour managing them. And coincidentally, on the same bill that night were Oasis. We were playing it, and Wetlands is a tiny place, 100 people max. And so the first time I saw Oasis was as a part of that show. And if you can imagine, this is 94, very early 94. It's a very small club. None of their dreams have come true, right? I mean, frankly, nobody in America's heard of them. And so the anger, the energy, all of those things that the world learned that Liam brought, he brought. And quite frankly, everybody in that room, including me, was, pinned to the back of the venue and lobotomized. They were extraordinary. They were extraordinary.
Wow. Okay. And then I wanted to ask you about crystal meth as well.
Well, there you go. Now that actually, Andrew, you see, look at this. You can tell you've done this before. It was the crystal meth incident, the crystal meth incident, which was the incident that shifted Marcus's focus from my being their head of security and road manager. So basically, at the point at which I was interviewed, which was immediately after the gig in New York, they were in the same hotel that we were. So Marcus and myself and Bonehead and Gwigsy had a drink after the show, and I said, look, I really want to work with the band. That happened. And then in between that interview and my starting, the crystal meth incident, and because the wheels had come off, and because nobody within the touring party, or none of their duty responsible adults, because Marcus wasn't there, had the, strength of purpose, experience, whatever, to hold the wheels together, to hold the thing together. And so, as is well documented, Noel disappeared. What perhaps is not so well known is he disappeared with the entire tour float. So every penny that the band had to sustain them over in the US was taken by Noel when he disappeared, in disgust at the fact that his band, and that's the way he's always seen it, had failed to deliver at an event and on an evening and at a show that was considered to be absolutely critical, for their future sort of development in the US. Didn't turn out to be the case. It made no difference at all. But so I wasn't there for the crystal meth mess.
Right. What was the incident, the mess?
The incident's very simple. Crystal meth is not Coke.
Yeah.
And Oasis are a Coke band. We're a Coke band. I'm sure that's not true now either. And in Los Angeles, certainly in that era, in the sort of, mid-90s, Coke was becoming very hard to get your hands on through the normal routes and channels that a rock and roll band might have, which is some small-time dealer in a nightclub. And the blunt instrument of choice was crystal meth or crack. And so they ended up with crystal meth thinking, how bad can it be? And they found out how bad it can be, because, literally, they couldn't perform. And Noel was absolutely furious. He knew what was at stake. And again, as a result of it, well documented, came off stage, pretty much threw his toys out the pram, demanded the tour float, and took it and disappeared.
So was it him on the crystal meth, or he was furious because the other Liam was on it?
I think none. He would have dabbled. My understanding, having been told the story after the event, having been told the story by the band after the event. Okay, so there's versions of the story. They had a couple of days before the show, and they partied before the show, and Noel kind of pulled the drawbridge up at a sensible time. He thought, okay, now's the time to sort of rein it in, get a little rest, be ready for the gig. And I'm sure the rest of the band will do the same. Well, they didn't. They kind of cracked on throughout. And so Noel was in a position where he was able to perform, and then also was aware of the fact that the rest of the band were not able to perform, and had to bear witness then, of course, to what was effectively a disaster. And he's incredibly patriarchal about the songs, their children, and to see them beaten to death in front of an audience was just, it was too much for him.
The reason I asked about crystal meth, it's such an extraordinary drug. I had never even heard of. I don't know that much about music history, but in relation to musicians, because it's just you always think of these people missing teeth. They're zombies.
That's where it will take you.
Yeah.
It's there aren't any reverse gears, that's for sure. But crystal meth is not a particularly elegant drug, and it's not a particularly stylish drug, and and rock and roll stars, even in their infancy, tend to steer away from it. It's not particularly a white boy indie mank drug, and frankly, on that particular occasion, that particular evening, it was only crystal meth because there was no coke to be had.
Interesting. Well, I see that's what it was.